Someone said everyone is creative.
People say, the logical person's kind of the opposite of the creative person. But you need a bit of both to make it work.
You can serve God in whatever He's called you to do. It's finding what you're good at and what you're passionate about, I think.
So movies these days aren't really that good because a lot of them are trying to preach their message.
Every single film was either it barely mentioned God, and then the only ones that actually tried to make the whole focus Christianity, they were always the most cringeworthy movies in the world. We shouldn't just be wanting to get out of life. We should also be wanting to give. As you have been given much, so give.
God is the ultimate storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
He interjects in his sovereignty, and just look at the Bible.
As Christians, we should literally be the most creative people out there. We should be creating the best things out there because we actually have a goal.
Yeah.
We have a purpose. Other people have a purpose, but we are literally working towards the purpose that God made us for. So we should be making the best things out there, and we're not.
Our topic being creativity. Using your creativity, one. But specifically, how do we use it for God? Because that's difficult. And it in some ways puts limits on how we can be creative, but in other ways makes it way better and way more freeing.
That's true.
So first, let's qualify what we're talking about when we're talking about creativity and content, and what are we talking about here?
That can be a lot of different things. I feel like you can be creative in a lot of things. Okay, my dad says he's not creative because he can't do art and that sort of thing, but he is. Because when he writes his sermons, he talks to me about it all the time, and he gets really passionate, and he's being creative, and he doesn't know. And I'm telling him, you are a writer, because you're writing sermons.
Yeah.
And he's always said he's not creative, and I'm like, you are though. So I feel like even people who think they're not.
Also, he's written a few songs too.
That too.
Yeah,
he's written.
I've sang one of the songs.
Yeah, the other day, Everlasting
God.
Yeah,
and he wrote that one.
Yeah. It's a really good song.
It is.
So he that's one thing, and I heard it, and I didn't believe it at first. Then I was like, oh, someone said everyone is creative.
I believe that wholeheartedly.
Everyone's got some kind of creative outlet.
Everyone has the ability to create, because it's very basic. It's just the ability.
Well, it's a really broad term almost, because you can use it for so many things.
Exactly. And so specifically, I think where both of us are kind of leaning is influential creation.
Right.
So you do mostly writing, and then I do mostly video. That's where I prefer to be. I like being in front of the camera. I like doing plot, and
I think it would almost fall under. I think creativity has a lot to do almost with communication, though, because you're communicating, but it's in an art form.
Teaching too, I'd say.
Yeah, teaching.
Yeah, and it kind of
because creativity without that is just kind of it just has no goal or purpose.
Like abstract art.
Yeah, it's what are you even doing? You have no. I've never really I've never really understood.
Because you don't know what it is.
Because it doesn't communicate anything. That's the big thing is.
So it has to be grounded in some sort of logic, because otherwise you're just gonna run with it. Which I'm sure we'll probably get into more of that.
Well, that's interesting because a lot of people say, the logical person's kind of the opposite of the creative person. But you need a bit of both to make it work.
You do. Well, logical people, Dad is very logical, but he has a creative side. And people who are creative, I'm creative, but I have a logical side as well. Because I take after Dad, and I'm logical. So you have to have some kind of mix, otherwise it...
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and even with me, I especially don't present as a logical type. But that's just because I was always the clown growing up. But
when we talk, when you talk to someone one-on-one...
Yeah, when it's one-on-one or a small group, I'm usually I'll open up more because... And I do have very much a logical side to me. Which,
Jonathan, you're that way too. You're very, you're the common sense. When we're, about to do something, this huge idea, you're but let's think about this.
Yeah.
First. But, you do have a creative side. You do music. And,
yeah.
we've worked together on writing projects.
Absolutely. And
And just recently you started photography.
Mm-hmm. I didn't even know I liked it. I didn't even know I liked it, and I just started doing it.
Yeah.
And we've worked on writing before,
Yeah.
and like I could see myself really liking that if I got into it. But music has been what I've mostly probably been involved in. I've done, you don't know this, but I've done like scores, like mock scores, like orchestra and stuff. And it's interesting because when you do it, you have to use logic.
Mm-hmm.
You have to.
Yeah, there's rules and structure.
Yep.
Yeah, if there's no structure,
we were even talking about this just before the podcast because we were talking about movie plots because that's something we've talked about multiple times. And we're talking about one movie which shall not be named. We don't want to offend anyone. But it's a certain Christian movie, and we're talking about how it's annoying because there's just no plot. There basically isn't. They had a story, they had an idea they wanted to portray, but they had no plot, so it was just a confusing mess.
It's facing the Giants.
Now he's gonna go offend people. Oh,
hey, I will defend that position. So
we all three
talk to me about that if you have any issues.
No, I agree with her. So if you guys have any issues, you can talk to me. I'll just tell you to shut up. No, that's rude.
I will give you a rundown, 3-page rundown of why it's bad.
Whoa, 3 pages. I would just
guys.
I would just give them 2 pages. One says it, and then the other one says sucks.
Just in all caps.
In all caps, just the whole page.
Huge font.
Boom. There's your proof. No. They had a good message. They just didn't execute it very well.
But even then, it was like the subtext portrayed a completely different message, though.
Yeah.
The actual story.
Yeah, that's because the plot.
The opposite of what they were trying to say.
The plot defied the story.
Because it didn't communicate. It was conflicting, and it's
Their whole thing was, we're going to trust God even if bad things happen. But guess what happened? Good things. So it's like...
wait, hold up. Where were we going with that?
The whole thing is you have a truth that you want to tell, and you have to prove it. And they didn't prove it because no bad things happened after they decided to trust God.
Yeah.
So it was like, what? Mm-hmm. I mean, there was a little thing where she thought she was never going to get pregnant, and then... she was actually.
And
it was like, okay.
Happen. You knew
and that was a subplot too, so it wasn't even that big of a.
That's why I have a lot of respect for like How to Train Your Dragon 2 or Big Hero 6. Like DreamWorks actually has that plot well.
They do. Pixar too. They have it down.
Where bad things actually happen sometimes because that's life.
Yep. Well, the thing is, whether you have a story where the character learns their truth. Then it has to be kind of a tough love kind of thing to make them get to that point where you take everything with them. And if the character already believes the truth, then you're like, okay, well, prove it. Do you actually believe it? Are you going to actually believe it? You literally take everything away from them. So
maybe explain that in writing Truth and the Lie.
So the Truth and the Lie, this is like my favorite subject. So, so the Truth and the Lie is basically, the truth is well, let's start with the lie. The lie is a misconception that the main character has about the world around them. Or if they believe the truth, then it would be a misconception that everybody else has. And I would add to that, that is a misconception that they have about God. And so the truth then would be the opposite of that. The truth. So it's kind of a specific thing that the story is about. Otherwise, you could write a story about so many things. You have to have that kind of structure.
And once you know that, you can't unsee it when you see movies.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Don't you have a video on that?
I have a video on the positive change arc, so it mentions that in there. I have a ton of blog posts about it, though.
All right, I'll link your blog for that.
It's good, especially if you're into writing. Yeah, it's super.
Yeah.
After you're done listening to this, go down in the description of what do they do? Follow your blog, right?
So you can subscribe to like an email notification, but I'm not sure how well it works because it has worked in the past, but I think it stopped working. So I don't know. Otherwise, just comment on one of my posts and then
there you go.
I'll put you in the...
And she's got a YouTube channel too.
Yes,
so I'll link both of those down below.
And Instagram too.
And so, with that being said, you've learned a lot. How have you learned? Because I assume you didn't just like think all these things by yourself. Because to get to your level, to be able to do better at writing, to be able to do better at screenplays, you have to learn.
Yeah.
And so how did you turn your raw creativity into something you could use?
So we have two different types of writers generally. There are the plotters and there are the pantsers. And I'm not sure if you ever heard that term before.
I've not. I'm not in the writing community
So
much.
plotting is basically where you have to have a strict outline. You have to know where your story's going. It's like really strict outline, all the plot points. And then there's a pantser, which is somebody who they're called that because they write by the seat of their pants. So they're basically like they just wing it and they just sit down and write. And so they have no structure whatsoever. I used to be a pantser. There's also in between, which is a plantser, so it's kind of both. But so I used to be a pantser. Jonathan, actually, because we were working on a writing project together, he's like, hey, you should take a look at this website because it talks about outlines. And so I'm like, because I was at the point, and plot. So I was at the point where I was kind of getting stuck because I had the creativity, but I didn't have anything to channel it. I didn't know where I was going with it, which for some people, pantsing actually works really well for them because they can put it all in their mind. But for me, that's not the way I was wired. So I started looking into it. Now, the author of this website, she claims to be a Christian, but she doesn't really talk about it very much. So I'm not really sure if she is. But anyway, she's at least clean. So I learned a whole bunch about all this outlining and plotting. But I'm like, there's not really much out there as far as structure for Christians. And so what I did, like I said before about the lie, where it's a misconception. So this author would define the lie as a misconception about the world around them. What I did is, it's also a misconception about God. And boom, literally you have spiritual things in the entire embedded into the plot. It's literally as simple as that.
And here's
because
why,
it's all about the truth and the lie.
Yeah, well, because it literally says, "My word is truth."
Exactly.
In the Bible,
it's like right there.
And here's the thing: we've talked about this for years, me and you. The problem with Christian media and movies in general is always the story.
Yes.
Because it's always conflicting message, and
well, it can come off as very preachy to people because it's very surface level, and this is a cool story. This is a cool story idea. Let's write it. And then they're like, oh, let's sprinkle a little bit of God. Let's put a little bit of sermon here. Let's put some prayer in here. What I like to do is teach people to embed it into your story. Your first thing you do when you sit down to write a story is you write out the truth and the lie. And guess what the truth and the lie is? It's literally about spiritual things. It's truth about God. And it's the lie that people believe about God. And so it's right there and it's embedded into your story instead of just like dusted on top.
See, for me, that's actually that's the exact same reason I went into film, is that I've seen, like, we had a PureFlix subscription, and there's some okay stuff, there's some, but the thing I found was every single film was in one of two categories. Either one, it barely mentioned God, and it was a Christian film, and it even was like had some stuff that I like actually disagreed with, or it was just like Christian family goes on wacky adventure that has nothing to do with God.
Exactly.
But then they're at a church service at scene 1 and the last scene, so it's a Christian movie.
Or they just pray at their low moment, like let's all join hands in prayer. And I'm like, so what does that mean? What are the implications?
What does that cause? And it's like, it caused nothing. Oh, okay. So that's not a Christian movie. And then the only ones that actually like tried to make the full focus Christianity never did it right. They were always the most cringeworthy movies in the world.
So, and I hesitate to say preachy because you do need to preach, but it needs to be ingrained. You need to show, don't tell. That is a major thing. Yeah. Show, don't tell. And you have to do that. Christians think it doesn't apply to them. But it does.
It does.
That's kind of why movies. That's why movies. That's why movies these days aren't really that good, because a lot of them are trying to preach their message.
They are.
Even ungodly movies are doing the same thing now.
Exactly the same. And except it's the wrong message too, so it really sucks.
So then it's just grating.
Yeah.
Well, and I've met a lot of Christians who don't even watch Christian movies or read Christian books anymore because they're just done. They're all so boring and they're so cringy and cheesy. And I'm like, as Christians, we should, God made everyone to be creative. We were kind of talking about this before. But as Christians, we should literally be the most creative people out there. We should be creating the best things out there because we actually have a goal. Yeah. We have a purpose. Other people have a purpose, but we are literally working towards the purpose that God made us for. So we should be making the best things out there, and we're not.
And there's so many video empires that have actually gone down over the years because the purpose eventually just boils down to make money. Mm-hmm. And so it's another thing where we can probably, if we actually put our mind to it, we could outlast a lot of them because we have a goal other than make money.
And it's not going to ever go away either.
Exactly.
And the thing is in the film industry, as a whole, not even the Christian film industry, they've just downgraded because now it's, the biggest explosion, that can happen or whatever, the best CGI. Instead of that's why I like old movies, because they're not trying to be flashy. A lot of them are just down-to-earth things you can understand. And the actors are good at, a lot of actors in old movies were like people in Broadway. So they did cuts that were minutes long. Instead of just cut. And they're all just so much more talented, and they put so much more work into it, I feel like.
I 100% agree with that because I don't watch a ton of super old movies, but especially the 70s, 80s, 90s movies, they still have a lot more of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. An actor like Jackie Chan, so I'm really into martial arts. Right. So I look at action in kind of the same way that you're looking at the story and the plot. And most action movies, it'll be a fight scene and it'll be 75 cuts.
Yeah.
Just you're just oh, it's so disorienting. Whereas with Jackie Chan, what he'll do is he does fight scene, a whole fight scene, instead of having 75, there's 7.
Yeah.
And because he actually takes the time and builds his action so that it's cool to watch. So you don't need all the cuts. You don't need all the insanity. And I think that even with story, it's the same way, where we need a plot that can just stand on its own without so much insanity.
Exactly. That's
a good plot. Well, and there's way too few.
Everyone, and I get that I've been told, you have to write in your genre and come to, know what readers expect in your genre. But I don't think that should confine you to just another cookie cutter book or movie.
Yeah.
You have to be original too. Otherwise you're just going to be Hallmark or something. And it's just the same exact thing as every other book or movie out there.
Yeah. I saw what movie it has one director, one plot, 15 actors.
And however many movies was 800
937.
Hallmark.
Yeah, Hallmark.
It literally is. Oh, there's actually an evangelist who actually, by the minute mark, tells you explains every single plot. He'll do it mid-sermon. He's done it he's an evangelist. He's in his 60s, and he'll do it mid-sermon, tell you exactly when they meet, exactly when they fall in love, exactly when there's a misunderstanding, exactly when the snow falls, and then exactly when they kiss.
You know what that means? That means he's watched a lot of Hallmark movies.
I think his wife watches a bunch of them.
Oh.
Because he's sick of them.
Which means he has
There's not anything, if you I like certain movies that are cheesy, I actually like.
Same.
So...
Yeah.
For me, it's cheesy comedies.
But yeah, so there is stuff like that you know what to expect, but you like it.
Yeah.
So there is that too, and I get that. But also, you want to bring something new to the table. And now there has been said that every story is just being told. I forget the exact quote, but that there's only 1 or 2 stories in the world, and they just keep getting told over and over again. And I agree with that to an extent.
Yeah.
Because there are certain themes you're going to reuse again. But there's there's not an infinite number of ways. But there's so many different combinations in ways. I don't know. That quote treats it it's there's a finite number.
It's like,
because it's kind of based on the fact that there is no God, whereas God has given us amazing creativity that we can use, and God is infinite. And so I'm just like, there's so many possibilities out there. Like, I myself have like over 100 story ideas. I'm never going to write them all. But it's like there's people out there that could write all these ideas.
God is, sorry to interrupt, but God is the ultimate storyteller. He, except it's real life. He interjects in his sovereignty, and just look at the Bible.
Okay, so I actually plotted out the story of humanity.
Oh my word!
Really?
On my blog, you can go and look.
I have
4 different arcs. So God is the ultimate flat arc.
Okay.
Right.
The humans who eventually are saved are the ultimate positive change arcs. So they eventually come to believe the truth. The humans who don't come to believe the truth and eventually come to believe the lie, that's a negative change arc. And then Satan is a negative flat arc, so it means he constantly believes the lie. And I plotted it all out, and it's so cool.
It makes sense now.
It literally, the entire story of humanity, from beginning to end, like when Jesus ushers in the kingdom, I have it all plotted out. Now, we could dispute a couple of the plot points.
Of course.
But I just thought it was really cool. I'm like, I've always wanted to do this.
What about the sequel?
What? You have to take that one up with him. I didn't write the story.
Okay, that is one thing that I feel like is missing from a lot of modern day movies is a positive flat arc. Like the mentor figure being perfect. I almost think that that's necessary to show the difference between the truth and the lie.
You have to have some kind of steadfast thing, because otherwise everyone's all about the morally gray characters, and I like morally gray characters.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Those are some of the best characters. But I feel like you have to have some kind of constant so people aren't like, I don't know what to believe. Because there's so many movies nowadays that people walk out of the theaters and they don't know what to think. They're so confused. Like, it doesn't offer them an answer because there's no specific conclusion that they come to. You're supposed to teach a message, but really they just ask a question and they don't ever answer it.
But that's most of the world. Like, you even listen to the world's music. They're asking questions and they're talking about problems, but they never have the answers.
And we were talking about this a while ago too. So many songs, whether it's about breakups or it's about this or that, it's all about the emotions that you're feeling in the moment, but it never offers a solution to those emotions.
And you know what the appeal is? It's people, they think, oh, I felt that.
They relate.
Yeah, and it's so relatable.
And it is relatable and comforting.
But all they want to do is wallow in their emotions, and they don't want to fix it.
And that's why
they say they do, but they don't want to fix it.
Well, that's why we have a lot of anxiety and depression. And I believe, I believe that it is real.
Oh, it's
but I believe that the cause is a lie from what they say.
Yes.
Because, anxiety and depression happens, but it's not only is it, I've heard people say it's not fixable. Not only is it fixable, it's treatable. It can be gone, and you can never get it again. Because it's a state of mind. Yeah. But when you're in the state of mind of, I have so many problems, without finding solutions.
Well, and you just want to wallow in it. You know so many people who, that's their excuse. I have anxiety or I have depression, and they don't want to get out of it because it's their excuse.
Because they start believing the lie.
Not to be insensitive about it, because it is a real struggle and it takes a lot of work to get through it, but you can, because at the root of it, it is a sin. And, worrying so much about something is a sin. And being depressed about something when you have hope through Christ is a sin.
Yeah.
So, and it's not a health problem either. No. Now, it can cause health problems, but it's not a health problem.
Yeah, I know. There was a while where I was actually, legitimately depressed. And I didn't realize that at the time, but looking back. And the problem was I was in a situation that just wasn't good for me. And I had issues, and I didn't know how to fix them. But instead of seeking advice, I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want people to know, because I'm like, I'll figure it out. And instead, I was depressed for 6 months because I wasn't coming up with the solution. And that actually caused me to get sick all the time.
Really?
That sounds very similar, because a while ago, it was probably a year or two ago now, I went through some of the same thing, and I didn't want to tell anybody because I feel like everybody would be like, well, why are you depressed? Because you have nothing.
Yes.
Because, like, on the surface, everything was going great. So I didn't really have a reason. But what I realize now is I didn't really have a purpose I was working towards. Like, I was kind of just in school, and I was just kind of, we're going to graduate, and we're going to do this. And, like, it wasn't really, like, now that I look back on it, it wasn't like living for the Lord. Like, I was, I went to church. I was, secretary at our church. I did stuff. But it wasn't like...
It wasn't purpose-driven.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing that actually got me out of that, those other things I changed, but one of the biggest things that switched it for me was actually doing the podcast. Because then I had a goal, a purpose. Mm-hmm. And I was using my creativity for the Lord. And I knew the whole time I should be doing it, but I never actually pulled the trigger and used my creativity for the Lord.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of just all circles back to it.
It really does.
So many people, like we were saying, want to wallow in their depression, anxiety, whatever they have, I see so many people, they have so much potential. They have so many talents that they could use for the Lord, but they have this one little excuse. They have this one little trauma that happened to them, and they can't get past it at all.
Yeah.
And it's like, but you could be doing so much. You have so much potential, but you just don't use it because you can't get past that.
And it's like, that's like plot or character arc in real life.
Yeah.
The lie that the character believes and the truth that needs to...
You can see it in your own life. And, people say they have different seasons in their life, and you can see it as you're struggling with a certain sin. That is your lie, and then you overcome it. Mm-hmm. But in the Christian life, you're never reaching that perfect point. So I don't know if you've ever felt like, yes, I finally got over this.
Yes.
And then God's like, nope, you have this other thing that you have to work on.
I know. I actually got to the point where there was a bunch of stuff I've been struggling with, and I actually got past a ton of it to the point where I'm like, whoa, I actually got through a lot. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as that happened, he literally just smacked me across the face with something. I was like, I have no clue what I'm doing. Yeah. What is going on here?
Yeah. And that is really interesting because it comes back to what we were talking about the positive flat arc.
Yeah.
So I think you should have a character in your story that portrays the truth. They believe the truth and they cling to the truth. You have to be careful because they still have flaws.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So what I have done is I have one character in one of my stories that he is a flat arc in the main truth. So in the main character, so he's a minor character. Okay, the main character is believing this lie. And so this side character believes the truth about that lie. But he has his own struggle with a different lie.
Okay, so he has a subplot.
So he has a little subplot. Yeah. So he has flaws. So nobody's ever perfect. And the flat arc character actually, unless you're God, obviously, because God never doubts or struggles. But the flat arc character will actually have moments of doubts and fears where he will be like, okay, I believe the truth, but will it actually work? Is God actually going to help me out here? So there is that too. Yeah. So you've never arrived until you get to heaven.
Probably one of my favorite flat arc characters, though, is Mr. Whitaker.
Yes.
He is like the embodiment, and the more I study it, it's like, oh, okay, so he's like actually supposed to be not in place of God, because he always talks about God, but he's the most mature person there, and he is that flat arc base that all the kids flaws. And all the
There's episodes where sometimes it'll talk about his past. Like there was an episode where he was talking about his past and he like couldn't forgive this person, and it was like so like. Because you're, like, wondering, like, that's Mr. Whitaker, though. He's not supposed to be, but he is.
Yeah.
Supposed to be like that. And a lot of the things that he learned and that he's teaching other people are things flaws that he had in the past.
Yeah.
So he's trying to teach other people.
And, yeah, I think they did, like, almost, I can't say a perfect flat arc character, but he's pretty close. Mm-hmm. Like, they did a very good job with that. Yes. And that's kind of the idea. For those of you, because I know, for a lot of people, they're probably hearing some of this stuff and just going, huh? Because, like, I didn't even know what a flat arc character was until you said it. And then I know enough about plot and character that I could connect it. Mm-hmm. But, someone like Mr. Whitaker, where he's always vouching for the truth. Mm-hmm. And that's the idea. And
And it's like, you can see it. Once you learn about this stuff, it's so cool because you can see it in all the best movies. You're like, I knew I liked that for a reason. Because it just goes along with this so well. And you can just put it on and it fits perfectly, all these outlines and everything. And you're like, I knew I liked that for a reason. It's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so cool. And we should probably dig into like movies and stuff. We should have another episode just talking about that.
We should do like where we talk about different movies and books that got it right, like Christian movies and books, because there are
and
good
got
examples.
It wrong, because I love talking.
And got it wrong, yes. So we can
Yes.
bash them, facing the giants.
Yes.
Not to name any names or anything, but
the first two initials are facing the giants.
we'll let you guess it.
We'll let you guess. But so if there's someone here, they're hearing what we're saying, they're like, oh yeah, I know about that. Oh yeah, I agree with that. Oh yeah, they're getting all of what you're saying. It's like, but then we're here trying to vouch for why should they get started.
Like channeling their creativity, using it.
Because we're already at 40. So in the next episode, we'll talk about how to get started.
Okay. So right now.
So this one, we're talking about why.
Well, that's good because that's what you start with when you start a story.
Because if you don't have a why, there'll never be a how.
Right.
Well, and we were just talking about how so many people use different things as excuses to not get started. And we see so many people in churches now who are looking for what they can get out of church and what God can give to them, which is true. Salvation, God has given you so many things. But the reason he gives you those things is so you can give back to him, and you should want to. Yeah. It's not like you have to. You should want to, and that's kind of where creativity comes in. If God's gifted you with creativity, which he has gifted everyone with at least a little bit, you should be using that for him. And I think that's what it all boils down to, is that you should want to.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the big thing. It's because at the end of the day, like she was saying, we shouldn't just be wanting to get out of life.
Right.
We should also be wanting to give. It's like as you have been given much, so give.
Right.
That's the way God wants us to be doing it.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people in the world know this. You hear, different actors and writers and people, they're like, what's your secret? And they say, find what you love and do it. Find what you're passionate about and do it. And a lot of Christians kind of miss that, I think.
Yeah, because I think the problem is, because that theme is so prevalent in the world, Christians often have this aversion to anything that the world talks about, which now it's based in good thinking, whereas a lot of the things the world is passionate about, we shouldn't be.
Right.
So that's fair. But then a lot of times we'll, as the saying goes, throw the baby out with the bathwater. Which is why I always tell people, take what you know and filter it through the Word of God.
Right.
Don't just throw it out because it's from someone that is wrong, Because even people that are wrong can teach you stuff. Right. I had a mentor who taught me quite a bit, and he was a Seventh-day Adventist. And so with that, I think you're absolutely right, because the world's talking about find what you love and do it. And I found I was like, I don't know, because I want to be doing stuff for the Lord. So my brain went to for a time I thought I was supposed to be a preacher, because my brain went to God wants me to serve Him. So that means I like this video stuff, but God wants me to serve Him.
Right.
And that's where my brain went.
So many Christians get this wrong. They think that if they're going to serve God, they have to be in some kind of church ministry. And that's why people a lot of times do it begrudgingly, because of that. As pastors' kids, we can probably relate to that, because people expect you, so are you going to be a pastor or a pastor's wife or something like that. And that's not really, and our parents, a lot of pastors, put a lot of emphasis on their kids going into ministry. And our parents have never really done that.
Well, a lot of pastors will do Bible college, Christian parents. And my dad's always said, if you think that God wants you to be a pastor, then maybe you should go to that. But even then, he likes the idea that local churches teach. But and disciple.
Right. Yeah. That too. But, and, you know, you can, just because you're not a pastor or a missionary or a pastor's wife or something like that doesn't mean that you can't serve the Lord. Because you hear a lot of people saying, like, oh, I could never do that because my gift isn't evangelism or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's all these excuses because they weren't called to do this. We're all called to serve the Lord in something. It's just that we have this idea that there's the sacred and there's the secular. And if you want to serve God, you got to do it here. And this is, you know, for other things.
Yeah.
But that's not what it is. It's all sacred. Your whole life is sacred. And so that means whatever your job is, whatever you're passionate about, you can serve God in that.
Yeah.
And that was like huge revelation for me because for a while I thought God wanted me to be a missionary just because I had this burden to serve God.
To Mexico, right?
Yeah, to Mexico. That was when I was like 10. And so, because I had this burden to serve God. And so I'm like, that's the only, you know, thinking, you know, obviously I can't be a pastor. Which is like a whole nother podcast about why. But,
you guys will love that.
Yeah, that'd be real fun. But, you know, I thought, so it would have to be, you know, a missionary or a pastor's wife. And obviously I don't have control over, to an extent, over who I marry, you know, whoever. So I was like, well, I could be a missionary then because I want to serve God. But I started getting into writing and I'm like, I really love this. I'm really passionate about this, but I also want to serve God. And so I'm like, how do these two things, you know, they're so like against, but they're not.
Yeah.
You can serve God in whatever he's called you to do. Even things that we wouldn't think of. Like if you're a plumber, you can glorify God in that.
Yeah.
You know, so it's finding what you're good at and what you're passionate about, I think.
Well, yeah, even in that, like, even Dwight, he just joined our church. He doesn't ever want to be up front. He doesn't, like, he's a very, like, reserved person. Yeah. But he's good with maintenance. He's a very
behind-the-scenes person.
Yeah.
But he's serving God.
Such a blessing
already. I mean, how long has he even been here?
Like he became a member at the same time as me.
At the same time as you.
Yeah, get on it, Silas.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Maintenance? Oh.
Yeah, let's go.
That is not my gift from God.
But it's so refreshing because as a church that has had to kind of start from the ground up these past few years, it's so refreshing to find somebody, even in something like that you wouldn't think of as being sacred and that you can use for the Lord. He's found so many ways to use that for God, you know, fixing different things around the church, and he's always willing to do it.
And he loves doing it.
And he loves doing it. Yeah. And it's so neat to see because so many people are missing their potential.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why, like, I even was like, oh, so like, you could work your job and then the way you serve God is then you give money to the church. But then it's like, no, you can also, like, actually do things for God with what you have. Like, even I have always been into computers. And I wanted a better setup. And I finally got one. I had a friend at work who he was getting rid of his setup because he was getting a new setup. He basically gave me his setup for free.
Nice.
And so I was finally able to, like, play video games and edit. And then I found out I didn't use it. I hardly used it. And then I also, the same year, got a nice laptop for, my dad did it as my graduation present. So for most of the kids, he bought their instrument for their graduation present because they rented, and so once they graduated, he's like, well, they're serious about it, I'll buy it outright. But then for me, I've dabbled in some different instruments, but I'm not super passionate about any of the instruments. I love singing, but other than that, it's like, oh well. Right. So instead, he bought me a computer. And then I was like, I don't use them. And I was literally having a conversation with my youth leader at the time. I was like, you know, now that I have these computers that I've been wanting my whole life, now I don't care. Like, I have no time to use them. I'm like, and then he said, the Lord will find something. It says the Lord has a plan. And it wasn't like more than like a couple months later, I was like, I need to do the podcast. All of a sudden, I had all the gear.
Everything. Well, and you find that so many times, whether it's something good or bad that God puts in your life, you know, it's there for a reason.
Yes.
And a lot of times, people have this skill they think they're never going to use, or something like that. Something sitting around their house they think they're never going to use. Whether they don't have time to or they don't have the desire to. But, sometimes years later, God brings that back and he's like, that's what you can use it for. And all of a sudden it just all makes sense. Yeah. And you're like, what? I remember way back, I just like doing stories for fun. I remember when we lived in Indiana, I was 10. And I started just telling stories to my little sisters. And it was just a fun little hobby. I never intended to do anything with it. I wanted to be a missionary or a teacher or something like that. I never thought I would do anything with it. And I was around 12, I had this identity crisis where I was I need to know.
How many of those have you had, Grace?
Too many.
Yeah.
So I was I need to know what I'm gonna do when I grow up. Now. I need to know. I need to have a plan.
Man, I didn't figure it out till 18. No, 19.
So I was freaking out about this, and I'm I need to know what I'm gonna do. And it wasn't any pressure from anybody else. It was just something that I put pressure on myself for some reason. So I guess I just like having anxiety in my life. I don't know. But which kind of goes back to what we were talking about before.
Actually, but
so I was I need to know what I'm doing. So I was maybe a teacher, maybe a missionary, maybe something like that. But it was just, again, it was all because I wanted to, I was I thought I only could serve the Lord if I was, being a missionary or whatever. And then all of a sudden, it was a light bulb turned on. And I was because I was writing during this whole time, writing stories. And it was God was that, why don't you do that? Why don't you do that?
Here's what God does. He doesn't say, you can't serve me until you do this, this, this. He always says, serve me with what you have
with
right
what
now.
You have.
Yes.
And
what
I think
you already
the fact that I was willing to be Lord, what do you want me to do? I want to serve you. And I was willing to be a missionary. And then I was and then God was this is actually what I have for you. And it was just so cool because it was something that I was already passionate about. And I was and that's around the time when I started learning about plots and started putting it together with spiritual things and being you can actually serve God in something like this. It doesn't have to be just in a ministry.
Yeah, that's 100% true. I was I had always been interested in video and film, but all the YouTubers they're just vlogging or whatever, and I was just that's not really compatible. But then and then if you want to get big in movies, well, then you have to go to Hollywood, and that place is horrible.
No.
I don't want to be anywhere near LA. But then I was I became friends with the Rabbitohs, which I think you've met them. You've met some of them. Titus and Quentin were at Quiz.
Sounds familiar. I met way too many people. So
either way,
probably met them.
I'm pretty sure I have, but
their family, and they've already done seven movies. They'll do one movie every year, so they've been doing it for 7 years. And they'll play it at camp, and they and I looked at the way they're doing the production. I was wow, they actually are actually doing this, and they I'm that means I could actually do it. Right. and all of a sudden I realized, and also I like talking. I've always liked talking. And I was there's no way that can be used. It's just talking. But all of a sudden I was oh, I can fit God into casual conversation. I can do a podcast where I interview. My motto has always been, I like talking, so I'll talk to people smarter and more experienced than me. So then, I'm not nearly as good at, I've done a little bit with plot, but you're way better at writing.
That's why I'm the co-host.
Yes. Well, I always need a logical ground.
Sure.
And so it just opened my eyes, and it literally wasn't until a year and a half ago that this stuff finally clicked in my mind. I'd had these skills that I was building up for literally 10 years, and it took 10 years before I was wait a minute, these can all be used for God.
That's awesome.
Right, exactly.
That's 10 minutes, or it's a foreshadowing or a flashback.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, it was only later that the Lord kind of brought back the ministry aspect of it, in the fact that I became passionate about teaching other people because there was not very much out there about Christian writing, at least like good quality Christian writing. And I was like, wait a minute, I can do that. Like I've studied this, I can do that. And so that's when I started like my blog and my YouTube channel and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, I only have, like over 100 subscribers.
You got an awesome name too. The Christian Writer.
The Christian Writer.
She got the domain.
So
wow. We got her the domain.
ChristianWriter.blog.
That's awesome, honestly.
So that, like, the Lord brought that aspect of it, like, back in after, because I had wanted to be a teacher because I think my spiritual gift is teaching. But then I decided I was going to be a writer. And so I thought, well, that's just never going to happen. But turns out, here we are.
Yeah.
I'm able to also do some teaching. And so that was just really cool.
A ton of writing is teaching.
Yeah. I mean, the whole point of story is that you're teaching something through, even if it's nothing close to reality, the world that your story is in, it's grounded in reality because you have these truths that come from reality. Because truth is, reality. So I just thought that was really cool how God brought that back, and he's like, well, actually, you can teach too.
Yeah.
So.
And so with that, if you have something that you're creative in, and that you're like, this is something and here's the thing. Don't just think of can I paint or can I write a book, right? Because not everyone can write a book.
Right.
Not everyone can paint. Not everyone can use a camera very well. And so what you have to do is you have to think about, even for me, I had to think about, wait, I like talking. Wait, that can be used for God?
Right.
But it can. And so think about just literally anything.
Anything you're good at and passionate about.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. If you're not passionate about it, then
then being good at it doesn't help.
Yeah.
Well, okay, the one thing that I will say, though, is don't rule something out just because you think you won't like it. Because God can use that, too. Because another thing that I've learned is, I went to a camp, I guess it would be over a year ago now. And I wanted to do something because I had never really felt kind of that unity with other Christian teens because we have a small church.
Yeah.
So I was like, I want, to do that more with my friends. And so I decided I wanted to start a young ladies Bible study. I am not a leader. And I can talk.
I gotta say, when you said that, I was very surprised.
Like, huh?
I was very surprised.
But around that time is when I realized I had the gift of teaching. Mm-hmm. And so, even though I'm not a leader, I felt that the Lord really wanted me to do this. And so I was like, okay, can I actually do this? And I started it, and, it's still hard for me to do, but I think he is using it.
Yeah.
And so don't rule something out just because you're scared of doing it or just because you think you're not good at it. Because God can use that too. God can take something that you're not good at it and help you be good at it.
When you came up with that conclusion, it was right around the time that I decided to start my study.
Yeah.
And we had no idea.
We both told each other on the same night because I was telling him about it and you're like, I too am starting a Bible study.
It was the same reason because I never thought of myself as, I knew I had the gift of teaching, but I never thought of myself as, I've always been thrust into the leadership position.
Because you're the oldest.
Because I'm the oldest, but I've never considered myself a natural leader, but I've realized God has put me in this position my whole life.
Yeah.
So you have training.
So I have training. And there's a reason for that. Like you said before. Mm-hmm. Why I've been the oldest, cousin, the oldest, on both sides, the oldest.
Pastor's kid
in every church I've been, oldest kid. Yeah. And it's like you said, it's to prepare us. And there's nothing like knowing you're doing what God wants you to do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Even if you're somewhat scared to do it or whatever, you have kind of a peace about, after I decided to do this, I was kind of scared about it. But after I decided to do it, I was like, yeah, this is right,
Yeah.
And the thing is, I also, being the oldest daughter, pastor's kid, that kind of thing, and also some of my friendships, I have been kind of thrust into a leadership role. I guess, I was the one to befriend them or whatever.
Yeah.
Some of my friendships are like that, and being an older sister. And so I'm like, I'm not, using this nearly enough because like it or not, I'm in this position, and so God put me in that position for a reason, so I need to like be using it even though I didn't like it.
I had the same sort of thing where I don't even know why I'm not. I've always been like in the position of being like the comforter or the advice giver, and I was like I think people just like trust me. I've been told that I'm approachable.
Very.
But because of that, I was like, man, this is so weird. Like, I'm able to connect with people. And that's one of the reasons I started this podcast is because I'm like, okay, so I can connect with people and work with them. So if I can have a healthy balance of like connecting and being like, hey, I know how you guys feel. I was a teen too. And then have the other side, well, not the other side, they go together. Two sides of the same coin of, and here's the solution. According to God.
Right. And that's another thing that I think has been lacking that I have noticed is we have a lot of like authority figures trying to help teens and trying to do this, but we don't have very many peers trying to reach teens. And because of the world we live in, a lot of times coming from authority, it doesn't really appeal to people and doesn't make them want to listen because they feel like they don't understand what it was like.
Yeah.
And so coming from a peer who understands, who lives in this generation, it's, it can be a lot more meaningful that there's someone, it's doable almost. There's somebody else actually living for God and wanting to, and there are ways that you can serve God, whatever age you are.
Yeah, like that's the other thing. You don't just prepare to serve God now. You do serve God now. Like, that's another thing. I was like, well, right now I'm a kid. I can't do a ton in the church, so I can't really serve God that much. It's like, no, you can do a ton right now.
There's a book that I read my senior year in high school that was really a game changer. It's called Do Hard Things. You read it too, right?
Same.
So
loved it.
Good.
Changed my life.
I should
change my life.
It really did, because it was around the same time where I knew the Lord wanted me to start this Bible study and all these different things that I had. And it was such a game changer because it was all about teens serving God. Like right now, you can do it. It's because it was about the expectations that people older than us have. They're teens. They're just teens. They can't do blah blah blah, or they're gonna be in the rebellious stage, or they're gonna do that.
Yeah. It's expected.
It's expected.
Yeah.
And we aren't given opportunities. And so what we've come to expect from ourselves is to just kind of sit around playing video games and just make passing grades and that kind of thing. Instead of, finding things and living for the Lord. Because, being a teenager, it's interesting. In the Bible, you're either a kid or you're an adult. So being a teenager is that transition. Between being a kid, so you're not a kid anymore. You need to start working towards your future. And towards serving the Lord. And so that book was all about, breaking kind of the expectations that people have for teens and that you can actually do things for God right now. Where you're at. So that was a really good help.
Yeah, and that's basically what we're trying to say here is no matter what age you are, if you're listening and you're 65, you can still do stuff for God. But if you're listening and you're a teen, don't wait. Don't wait till you can go to Bible college. Don't wait till you can become a pastor. Whatever you can do. If you're good at baking cakes, then find people to bless with baking cakes. If you're really good at, carpentry, then help build things, fix houses for people in the church. Have a ministry there. Like, you can literally be a blessing with anything. Like I said, talking. Literally, you can use that to bless people.
Anything. And I guarantee you're good at something. You say you're not good at something, you probably
It's not true. And, we're going to talk about, so you'll want to stick around for next episode, how are we going to do that?
Right.
What are the tools? Because there is some structure to it.
Yeah. One more thing is that a lot of adults, I like talking to older people because they have so much wisdom. And one of the things, their biggest regret is that they didn't start, whether they didn't get saved until later on in life or whether they just didn't start serving God until later. And they say, they're just like, serve God now. Start serving God now. You have so much energy, so much potential, so much opportunity. I mean, this is probably the most time we're going to have in our lives.
Oh, yeah.
Because getting a career, once you get into having a career or you get married and have a family, you're not going to have as much time. And so it's just a very great opportunity to be at the stage we're at right now, and so many people just kind of use it for their gap year or their downtime or whatever.
And that's the year you can learn all this creative stuff we're talking about.
Exactly.
That's where you can start, which is why I'm so glad I graduated a year early, and I've pretty much made the decision that I'm not going to go to college, but I figured I could have a gap year where I could get started on my writing, because having that head start is so helpful to build a platform and to be able to start getting published.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people said, they wish they would have done that when they had time when they were younger, and now they don't have time. Mm-hmm. I've met so many older people who I wish I would have written a book, because they have so much to give. Even at a young age, you have a lot to say.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just, don't waste the time that you have.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, we're out of time, but I'm just going to add quick, and I'll probably talk about it more in the next episode, is even if you get criticism, think about it, but you don't necessarily have to take it. Because I was actually laughed at when I said I was going to start this podcast.
Really?
By people that knew me, that I was friends with. They were... It was kind of mean. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was a weird thing, but I when I said I was going to give it's an advice-giving podcast based on the Bible, I was actually laughed at.
Really?
Yeah.
That's just really sad, because a lot of people have advice to give you. You're looking for encouragement and advice from other people. So yeah, don't let that stop you.
Don't let that stop you.
If you're passionate about something that's
good, it's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
The naysayers will come out.
And I've had people who are like, oh, you want to be a writer. Are you sure that's going to pay the bills? Are you sure that's going to...
That's the first thing people...
It's how much money do you make?
Yep.
I'm okay,
I get... when you talk to people.
Yeah. I get, why they're asking that, because they care about you and whatever. But that shouldn't be your main focus, is the money. Because there's so many jobs that wouldn't get done if people just focused on the money.
Yes.
Yeah. And especially when you're beginning something that is creative, a lot of times entrepreneurial stuff, you can't focus on that side of things at first. You have to put time and stuff into it before you can get something out of it.
Yeah.
So, don't let that stop you either.
All right. So next episode, we will be talking about how are we supposed to use the creativity? Where are we supposed to use the creativity? How do we learn? How do we build our skills? But with that being said, I think we're going to skip the last segment, because if you want to know what's making us happy and what we're grateful for, watch the next episode and you will find out. But with that, thank you guys so much for watching this episode, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.